So, good afternoon, guys, and welcome back to another fantastic episode of The W.O.W Show. If you are new here, I am Vernaire and I am your host. First off, let me wish all of our Anguillian listeners a happy, belated Anguilla Day. I'm so excited to be in the studio with an Anguillian, in particular, an Anguillian politician, the Honorable Quincia Gumbs-Marie, a passionate advocate for climate action and sustainable finance, particularly for small island developing states and British overseas territories. Good afternoon, Quincy, and how are you this afternoon?
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for wishing all Anguillians a happy Anguilla Day, and I join you in doing the same. Though belated, but we had a great Anguilla Day, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Fantastic. So, guys, you already know how it goes here on The W.O.W Show. Grab your favorite drink, settle into a comfy seat, and join us for another show filled with inspiration, empowerment, and sisterhood. Also, be sure to check out the first 4 episodes of The W.O.W Show by visiting at Women of the West Indies on Facebook or 664 Connect Media on YouTube. Welcome to The W.O.W Show. So, guys, if you're just joining us now, you are tuned in to The W.O.W Show with me, your host, Vernaire. And again, this afternoon, I'm so happy to be in the studio with the fantastic Anguillian politician, the Honorable Quincia Gumbs-Marie. Quincia, we just touched a little bit on Anguilla Day. What is the significance of Anguilla Day?
Well, Anguilla Day is marked by May 30th every year, dating right back to 1967, where we had a small revolution where we fought for our direct access to proper governance, and it was cessation from our relationship with St. Kitts Nevis. So before 1967, we were St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla, and in December 19th, following May 30th, we celebrate Separation Day. We officially separated. So it's about having direct rule, having more autonomy in our country, more say, and definitely was underscored by the need for more direct involvement in development.
Fantastic. I never knew the reason behind Anguilla Day, and I only learned probably about a year ago that you were connected to St. Kitts and Nevis, which is really interesting. So, as someone who hails from the beautiful island of Anguilla, what would you say sets Anguilla apart from other places you visited?
Where to begin? So I would say that firstly, I'm a person that loves beach destinations. So if you're not a person that loves beach destinations, maybe Angola wouldn't appeal to you, maybe. But we have some of the best beaches in the world. And I think Angola is defined by unpretentious luxury. So we have a very defined luxury product, but it's not to the point where it's snuffy and inauthentic. Our food is second to none. And when I define luxury, I speak about space, wellness, solitude, food, entertainment, culture. And I think that we have a very well balanced product that represent those things. And when I go to other places, like I might find something that's lovely, but because I come from a tourism background, I relate it to back home. I'm like, you know what? Home is always better. And it's not me being biased because a lot of people would say, like, how are you vacationing here when you come from Anguilla? But it's just an opportunity to see the world in a different way. But I think Anguilla's product is very unique. And I
Mhm.
think it's something that can't be matched. A lot of who we are, especially, comes from this deep sense of ownership. We feel as if we own the product of our tourism. And that goes back to our history of owning land and owning the resources of the country. And this sets us apart historically from the rest of the region where the crown owns most of the land, but in Angola, the people owns most of the land. And that goes back to us not having very as strong ties to slavery as other countries. So we had a level of freedom that came with a level of ownership. So when you speak to an Angolan, when you experience um, hospitality from an Anguillian, it's a different level of, it's more like welcome home. Even if I'm working in a villa, even if I'm serving you food, it's more like you're being a part of a product that we created. And so that level of ownership really sets apart Anguilla from anywhere I've ever been in the world.
That's fantastic because, like you said, for example, here in Montserrat, most of the land is probably owned by the crown. And then, I think that gives you that sense of pride as well in your tourism products because, most of it is actually by the people, for the people in some
Right.
way. So, the other cool thing about you is that your mum is Dominican, which means that you've experienced a rich blend of cultures and traditions. So you spoke really highly of Anguilla there with your fantastic white sand beaches. But of course, because of your multicultural upbringing, you spent a lot of time in Dominica as well. So how would you say that being part Anguillan and Dominican influences your identity?
Well, it has, it's said that you learn culture from the mother, and it's the mothers who usually pass on traditions. So I think, in terms of sometimes the way that I cook, some of the phrases that I use, and sometimes even the way that I speak, I can definitely credit that to my mother. And it's probably even worse having a Dominican husband. but
Oh, interesting.
But the thing about Dominica and Angola, they are polar opposites in terms of the offerings, the topography, the history of the countries, the dichotomy that exists within the countries. Like you have a very clear countryside and a clear town side, where you don't have that kind of dichotomy in Angola. But I think having those two very strong backgrounds, because my father is extremely patriotic and my mother is also extremely patriotic, it really exposed me to the idea that I wish a lot of people had, is that your experience is not the foundation of reality. And so I was able to know that this is something that's normal in Anguilla, but not normal in Dominica, or vice versa. Or having a level of tolerance that allow allows me to realize that, I guess, part of my not so unique experience, because there's a lot of persons with different backgrounds, but I think in seeing my mother having to navigate levels of nationalism that would have made her feel excluded, um, it's my it's important for me to build tolerance around the persons with dual identities, or even the identities that are different from our own. And it's important to hold on to a level of nationalism, national pride, and placing your people first in different for different opportunities. But in the same breath, understanding that in the same way Anguillians deserve to go abroad and have a reception, have an opportunity to build, it's the same way that persons deserve an opportunity to come here and do the same. And so that background really made me very sensitive to the fact that people come from different places and everybody deserves an opportunity to experience what I call global citizenship, where they
Mhm.
have the opportunity to travel and be who they are and stand for what they are.
That's actually fantastic and takes me nicely into the next question because you moved to Toronto in 2012 to pursue your studies at the Ted Rogers School of Management and Ryerson University, which would have marked a significant chapter in your life as a global citizen. Could you reflect on that, on a pivotal moment or lesson from that experience that deeply influenced your personal growth as a young woman from the West Indies?
But I think it was first and foremost very daunting. Only living in Anguilla, a laid back, small, close knitted community, to go into a metropolitan area was extremely daunting. I remember my first day. My first day visiting my campus. So my campus is situated in the heart of downtown, which is not usually where universities would find themselves. And I misread a stoplight sign and I crossed the road at the wrong
Oh
time.
gosh.
And my mother was just like, my child is gonna die.
How am I gonna leave her here? She can't even cross the
She
road.
decided to pack it all up. She was like, you know what? You're coming back home with me. So I mean, that was my very first experience, because it was like the second day or something like that. But I mean, obviously, I integrated very easily, and coming from an environment where it is a multicultural society, and interestingly enough, one of the benefits of my dual identity was that there are a lot of Dominicans there. So they just knew that I was from
Okay.
Dominican heritage, and they just like reached out, and they heard that my mother had a daughter, and they didn't care if they knew me or not. It was, welcome to our home. and really make sure that there was some people looking out for me, because most of my family and friends, as it is with British overseas territories, would have gone to school in the UK. So I was
Yes.
kind of alone over there, and that would have kind of helped me to have a sense of home with people that I did not know, but just through culture, through hearing the accents, through food, through different types of behaviors, you kind of felt that there was a piece of home.
Hmm.
Um, and because Angola is a smaller population, you wouldn't have had as big of a population over there. And um, I think one of the ways that that would have shaped me, though, my experience up there, is that I came out of it very empowered and confident in myself. Because you go somewhere, like I said, no one knows you. You don't know anybody, so you don't have any connections. And especially in the system of school itself, and you have to make your own waves. And I've realized that I it's sometimes when you're home and you think of the opportunity to receive, you wonder, like, is it because of my father? Is it because of my uncle? Is it because of my aunt? Is it because of my friend? And you realize that, you have your own juice. You're making your own waves. You're like
Hmm.
your own person. And one of my personal mantras is step into the room and change the temperature. And I've realized that my experiences are worth having a conversation about. They're unique, and they also set me apart from other people with different experiences. In the same way, they bring me closer with other persons. So I felt like I found my voice there, because I felt a level of empowerment and strength in that space where I had no background, but I was still able to, make a name for myself and make an impact on my school, to the point that we still have a very strong relationship to this day.
That's
I would have been,
fantastic.
sorry.
No, I said that's fantastic.
So I was recently awarded top 10 of the last ten years, last year, October, from my university.
Congratulations.
So we're still very much in close contact. Every year I do a guest lecture there. Um, and, I haven't been back to Toronto since my graduation, but I'm hoping to be back next year, because it did have a pivotal contribution to where I am today.
And it's interesting. Why did you select Toronto instead of the easy choice of going to the UK?
It may sound terrible. I just didn't want to go to the UK. I was like, I want to see something different. I want to experience something different. And I don't know why, when I thought of something different, the UK was like, no, I hadn't been there before. I hadn't been there before. I had like no real connection. My brothers were there, and I just thought like I wanted to find a space where I can do something on my own, separate from family. And I just thought, oh, why not do this? So I applied to one school, and I was like, if I don't get in, then I'll have to kind of, spread the net a little wider, and that might take me to the UK. But if I do, that's kind of where I'm gonna go. So I applied to that one school, I got in, and the rest is history.
Interesting. So after completing your studies in Toronto in 2016 and even achieving a milestone of becoming a published author, you decided to return to Anguilla to contribute to the island's development. What motivated that decision, especially when you had other opportunities knocking at the door?
I think a little delusion. I always wanted to come home. And so I did, like, I had tunnel vision. It was get through this space, make the most of it as you can, and then come back home. It was never like, oh, well, the world is your oyster. Let's see what's possible. Like, I just had this thing of, when I'm done, I'm coming back home. And maybe that's why I wasn't, um, persuaded to look in other directions when they were presented to me. It was like, thank you. I mean, I can do this over the summer, but when I'm done in 2016, I'm coming back home. And something about that stamp in my passport that said, August, whatever date it was, 2016, you got to be out of here. I was like, nobody's going to have to ask me twice. I'm going back. So when I went with the idea and the knowledge that when I'm through with this point in my life and I'm through with this experience, I'm coming back home. And I always wanted to build a life and a family here. And I think that more than anything was the anchor. Because I can see how easily, if I didn't go with that mindset, I might have been living in Toronto today.
Absolutely. And also during university, you fell in love with policy and its development. And then after university, you worked in your family's business. How
Yes.
did you think both experiences influence your decision to pursue a career in politics?
Well, it was incredibly frightful at first because it was in my final year, in my final semester, where I had this like train hit me. I am in the wrong course. And
Wow.
on my second trimester and semester.
No trimester. We'll get to that soon. We'll get to
so,
that
so
soon.
yeah, I was like, oh my God, this is not a time when you want to make, I mean, probably in your second year, maybe coming down to your first year, you want to have these realizations and then pivot from there. But when you're coming down to the end, it's like, where are you going to go? You can't start over from the beginning. What are you going to do? So I had a very good relationship. As you mentioned, I was published from my university. And so they realized that I really like research and development. And they came in and was very supportive, and they allowed me to finish my degree in a different way than was necessary for my completion. So I was able to pull in all of the policy courses that I could possibly pull in my final year, um, so that I can at least get to a point where I could have a semi foundation, and whatever choices I make thereafter, then I can kind of specialize in policy. So when I came back home, I was a manager of business development, which coincidentally is basically the policy side of building a business. And that got me deeper into policy. So then I realized that I think I wanted to either redo a bachelor's degree or do a master's degree. And so last year I completed my master's with the University of Edinburgh. I did that online while being a minister for
No pressure at
international
all.
development. Sorry?
I said no pressure at all.
I just was like, I have some extra time in the evenings. Let's see how far it takes me. And I actually finished with merit. I was hoping for a distinction, but I was busy. Sometimes I couldn't get my all.
Congratulations either way.
Thank you. And so now I feel like I'm very much where I wanted to be. Politics was, although I did a political science degree, I've always loved development and policy. And I don't necessarily need to be a politician to do that, but this is where I feel most fulfilled, where I see theory, paper, practical kind of um, coming together as one and being able to make a difference. So those two experiences and then leading into politics was actually a good foundation for getting involved in sustainable development and policy building in whatever capacity I find myself doing it in the future.
Fantastic. So, guys, if you're only just tuning in now, I am speaking to Quincia Gumbs-Marie, and we'll be back after a few seconds. So, guys, we are back. And so far, we've been speaking a little bit about Quincia's childhood, growing up between Anguilla and Dominica, her journey to Toronto, where she pursued her first professional qualification, we should say. And then now we're getting a little bit more into politics. So, Quincia, obviously, getting into politics is an interesting experience in its own self. But what were some of the most memorable and challenging experiences you faced on the campaign trail as a young politician? And how did those moments shape your approach to leadership and public service?
I think some of the most memorable um, experiences is watching the tide change because we are a very young party. This is our first time running. I run with the Anguilla Progressive Movement, led by Dr. Ellis Lorenzo Webster. And um, we come from a party that previously called the Anguilla United Movement, but the different perspectives, but we build on a very strong foundation, although we're still a new party. And it was a lot of skepticism around this party with who they were referring to as rookies because there was no one in the party, but for one person who was elected ever. And it was like, well, who are these young people? What are they think they're going to offer? And it moved from there to, okay, the conversations are good, the interviews are good, the view of where they would like to take Anguilla is inspiring. So I'll give it a second chance, I guess. And then it moved from a level of, I'm kind of interested to a level of confidence. And it was interesting to see that wave build in real time. And so too our confidence as young politicians as well. I think one of the challenges though was more personal in that it was surprising as a politician to see how many persons took politics so personally and how people who I won't say were my best friends but were very good acquaintances. Every time we see each other we have a good word and a good vibe and a good conversation. All of a sudden that person is a little skeptical to be too good to me because maybe that'll be perceived as support. So now it's kind of like, I'm not going to engage with you on that level. And my first response, and that just goes to who I am when I am in situations like that, was, okay, I can see that you want space, so I'll give you space. And so the energy wasn't reciprocated, but the space was. And then I realized that because I was giving person space and I wasn't communicating with them to be like, whatever you do politically, it has something to do with how I think of you as a human. It gave the impression I too felt that way. Like I also don't want to be associated with you. But I think that lesson played very strongly in my leadership style now because I realized that it is my responsibility at times to make persons feel confident, uncomfortable, and I understand why. Where before I would have said it's not my job to make you feel comfortable. When now I have to say the opposite because it is how you give people the comfort to feel safe with you and recognize the things that you put above all things else. I don't put politics above everything else. I don't put politics above human interactions. And so now I know better to assume that maybe I should have let a vacuum, fill that space between me and that other person and say, hey, I've noticed that you've been a bit distant. And I want you to know that politics aside, we always have this level of respect for each other. And if there's anything I can do to support any causes you're a part of, or whatever, I'm here. And that's much more useful than saying, oh, this person's giving me the cold shoulder, so I'll give them the space to exist in their own world, which is what I would have done before. So that influences my leadership style. Sometimes, in work, you're not going to find someone who supports you politically, but you need to empower them to take up the same amount of space that you take up so that you can have the best results and you can have the best working relationships. And so that's not how I try to lead. But that was a big lesson coming out of the campaign for sure.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the lessons that people don't really think about, to be honest, because one of the points that you raised just now is the fact that you are going to now be in the ministry with persons who don't support your party, but you still have to work with those people to achieve the goals and objectives of that
Right.
ministry. So I think that learning that on the campaign definitely gave you, the knowledge and the know-how of how to navigate things once you were actually appointed into a role. So that's a very, very interesting point indeed. So how did you feel when you were announced as the Parliamentary Secretary of Natural Resources, Tourism, Economic Development, and Information Technology in the government of Anguilla, just 4 years after leaving university? Where were you and how did it feel when it was announced?
Um, it wasn't part of my, 10-year plan. In fact, I had just gotten married the year before in 2019, and I was like, maybe I need to focus on being a wife, whatever that meant. But yeah, I was like, I need to focus on doing that or, building a family. What am I doing getting into politics? And eventually I was persuaded. I mean, I've always had an interest, and I was working with the party on the policy building side. So I was familiar with the party. I was not a candidate. And then I became a candidate, and I was like, if were it not for COVID, I would have become a candidate 5 months before the election. And I was like, I'm crazy. And after that, it was just the excitement of first and foremost being elected. So it was like, okay, I'm here, but I'm a team player, and any role would have been a role that I would have taken up wholeheartedly. So being um, announced as parliamentary secretary was an honor. It was a very big title. And, up to this day, not that I'm no longer the parliamentary secretary, but up to this day, people always say, like, you've taken up that role like no other. Like, you've made it almost as if that role is a ministry. But it really also came with working with a minister like Minister Hayden Hughes, who's the Minister of Tourism, who was my substantive Minister of Tourism at the time, who gave me a lot of space to take up in his ministry to do the work that I did, and really own it in a way that other people might have felt threatened by. But he really created space for me to just do what I needed to do, get the policy work done, get all of the work needed to be done on its way. And also the international opportunities. A lot of persons are like, what does it mean to be a parliamentary secretary? What's the difference between you and a minister? And I'm like, well, we're all elected. We only have a few roles, and people have to take up different roles. And I'm here. It doesn't matter to me because I'll work regardless. And so it was really an opportunity to learn a lot about government, and I'm really thankful for that opportunity to have predated my ministerial experience, because it really gave me a chance to learn about several different ministries and several different departments, and then coming into my own. So knowing how they work internationally, knowing how they work together, and seeing the fusion, and also having the space to support other ministers when I was PALSEC was also important to me, because it created an opportunity to bond with people that I hadn't really had a chance to know before, and also to prove what I bring to the table and give other people a chance to prove what they bring to the table. So it was really a welcomed opportunity regardless.
That's fantastic, because I know, especially in a political party, most people, would want to be a minister. So it's nice to know that even though you weren't appointed as or elected as a minister in the first instance, that you saw the benefit of being a parliamentary secretary, and then also being able to prove yourself in that role to eventually become a minister, which you are now. But one of the crazy things, obviously, not just being a young politician, not just joining a new political party, in your first year as a politician, that coincided with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was unprecedented. It was an unprecedented challenge globally. How did you navigate the crisis in your role? And what lessons did you learn from managing Anguilla's response to the pandemic in your early days in office?
Well, it was interesting because, again, I would have been 27, I think, at that time. And the premier and governor had appointed me as the czar of COVID response,
Wow.
whatever that meant. And what it really did mean, though, it was that I was the glue between the medical and the economic. So I was responsible for leading Anguilla's navigation into reopening its economy, working on vaccination and getting persons to be interested in taking the vaccine, working on getting the tourism sector back and running. So there's several things that we were able to do. One was the work from home permit. Um, Interesting. I think sometimes marketing is an interesting thing, because we would have had ours set out from before Barbados this one, and then when we saw that they had this big thing about it, we were like, but it was still good to have been able to speak with them, because they were out of the back. So we got some of the challenges they had and made the necessary legislative changes on our side. But that would have resulted in over $1 million of revenue in that year for the government of Anguilla, $1 million US. So that was a good revenue earning stream at a point where we had little to no economic activity, especially as a country that relies heavily on tourism. And then we had the bubble, which was written about in so many international publications, CNN, there's Fox News publications on it, all the top travel and leisure publications that have written on Anguilla's travel bubble, which will allow you to experience Anguilla in a safest possible way, while being tested for COVID and having access to ancillary services, but you just wouldn't have direct access to the people, because we tried to have almost two realities, where we had a COVID-free environment in the country, and then we had uh, uh, a tourism experience that we tried to keep as COVID free as possible. Um, and that was a very new concept, but it was one that was very well welcomed by the people in the country because they felt safe. But they also felt it was a safe way to begin and rebuild our economic engine. And from there, we went from small steps to full reopening. And in that experience, I learned just very easily that leaders lead and leaders listen. Because one of the things that you find is that you have to convince the population that this is a good idea, first and foremost. And you have to make them comfortable in the measures that you will take to keep them safe, but also give them an opportunity to rejoin the workforce. But one of the things that I hadn't anticipated in the first instance is having to do the same with my team because I'm like, okay, you guys know this information I have. There's no need to let you know this is important to do. And then there were some trepidations and some persons being cautious and nervous. And so, while you would hear those concerns, you'd have to pick concerns out of fears. And so address the concerns and empower through fears and have uh, a strong belief in your own outcomes. And I think that is what I would have gotten from that experience. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I wasn't parliamentary secretary. So it was a really good experience. I sometimes tease some ministers now. I'd be like, I was doing more when I was policy secretary now that I'm a minister because I was navigating so many different ministries at that time. But our premier had one focus in mind, which was getting the economy back on track, but also as a medical doctor, he had a lot of expectations in what safety would look like and how you can safely do so. So being able to meet those needs and being able to give him the information that he needed to realize that goal was really a great opportunity throughout.
Mhm. That's absolutely fantastic. And obviously, as a young politician, you just mentioned that you would have been around 27 years old at the time, which still sounds like a baby. You're not even 30 yet, and you're having to deal with a global pandemic. But not only that, you've probably found yourselves in rooms where you were one of the few, not just being young, but also being female.
Mhm.
How do you address skepticism regarding your capability and your experience?
Well, that is really a good question because now, as I'm a minister responsible for fisheries and agriculture, I am not only the youngest in the room, but I'm usually the only woman, and so it's sometimes it's almost like people start out the conversation in relation to you as her. And then we guys will figure it out. And even when I got appointed to this ministerial position, there were persons on radio saying, like, well, she liked to dress and she liked to look good. What does she know? What does she know about agriculture, which is not, it's not a sexy ministry, and fisheries? She don't even know how to catch a fish. Can she even identify fish?
Wow.
And I was like, I can't. But what's the point? Like, I know how to do my work. My work isn't about identifying fish. It's about being able to cater to our fisher folk and persons in agriculture. So one of the things I took from that, like right away, is that your skepticism of me is not a signpost of my ability. So it's fine for you to have that level of skepticism. It's okay. That is based on your experience and the projections that you have based on your experiences. But my ability is literally based on what I can do. And as minister responsible for agriculture and fisheries, under my belt, I have the largest investment in that sector, $2.5 million. Under my watch, we are now increasing the productive days from 140 days a year to 220 days because, unlike Montserrat, you don't have lovely soil and nice rain. We're flat and it's dry. Um, and I have been able to provide solutions in the form of shade houses, water tanks. Um, Under my leadership, we now have a hatchery that's going to come on stream this year. So we'll be able to hatch our own chicks locally, which
Oh,
is a big
congratulations.
pride from our farmers or poultry farmers. We also be having our own and our first abattoir that's coming on stream this year, and it's important for the slaughtering and the grading of meats that we hadn't had before. Under my ministry, we have joined the Blue Belt, which is very important for our sustainable fisheries, and we will be doing our first fish processing plant. All these things that have been required and requested from 40 years plus and haven't been advanced because persons are afraid to do policy. And I'm like, I always say, like, when it comes to advancing things, if you don't have a clear outcome, you can't start. So I've done the work, the boring work of the paperwork, and then given my team blueprints to follow. And we have had more results than the ministry that department has ever had. Under my leadership, we've had our first renewable energy department. So that came on stream this January, and renewable energy is becoming more and more important for us as we attack the cost of living resulting from the cost of high energies. So it's a lot of work that I have done and I've proven myself. And a lot of persons who are like, persons who would have said before, what are we going to do with this person, this woman as our minister? And they're like, you better not, because there was a rumor that I wasn't going to run again. I don't know where it came from. And I got like really angry calls. Not empowering, not encouraging. Just
Oh,
like, where are you
wow.
going? Where are you going?
The
I'm like, I don't
irony.
know. Where am I going? They're like, I heard that you're not running. I'm like, of course I am. They're like, oh, have a nice day, bye. Because now, like I have proven myself as someone who was given all of what I can give and have also have the results to show for it. So I've come to a point where I say it's not about what the room has to say about me, it's what I have to say to the room. And I don't really worry about persons' perceptions of me before having a chance to actually get to know me, because once they do, the tune changes and my work will always speak for itself. So the skepticism is there, but it's just gives me an opportunity to wow another person.
I love it. So what message do you have for other young women aspiring to enter politics? Because as you see, as well as we've expressed throughout this conversation, it's not easy, and sometimes you're judged before you're even given the opportunity to start. So what would you say to other young women who are aspiring to enter politics, but may have some form of trepidation, or they're not willing to take some of the criticism that you have received?
um, I'd probably say three things. I'd say first, be delusional about yourself, because people like to humble you in a way that kind of makes you wonder if the things that you aspire for are worth it or even achievable. And I have been in rooms, particularly where I've seen men literally stand on delusion and they get there. And a lot of us women, we feel like, my friend sometimes, she teases me all the time. She's like, why did you go and get a master's? You're a minister. You've done all these things. Why do you need to? I'm like, well, because I needed to prove that I can do what I have done. And I needed to have something that, supports that. And she's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Just be delusional about yourself. And I understand exactly where she's coming from, which is just aim higher than you think that you deserve to be, because chances are the higher position is where you are needed more than the safer position. So be delusional and tap into being a bit more than you think you can be, because you'd be surprised at how you respond when you're in places where you thought, because of other people's opinions of you, you did not deserve to be there. And I would say secondly, um, eradicate the word arrogance from your vocabulary, because a lot of women are described as arrogant when they dare to be different or when they dare to believe in their own confidence. Like, someone could listen to me describe all the things I have done thus far and say, what an arrogant woman. She thinks that she's so this and she's so that. And I always ask, I consider myself humble, but why should I consider myself less? Because those things are not synonymous. And they're little words, they're little microaggressions that are preserved specifically for women. And I think arrogance is one of them, where they try to say, you don't deserve to clap for yourself as loud as you're clapping for yourself in this moment. You don't deserve to believe in yourself as strongly as you believe in yourself in this moment. But in a society where women are constantly undermined and constantly positioned as you need to show yourself or prove yourself a little bit more, it's important to have that level of confidence because language is really the precursor of action. And if you believe yourself to be arrogant, you're going to be less confident. And you need to understand what that word actually means and remove it from the colloquial saying because you put it on yourself. And there was a time when I felt like, am I arrogant? But then I really like took my chance because I love language. And I googled it. And I was like, I'm absolutely not arrogant. I'm just confident, and I'm proud of what I've done, and I'm happy to say that I've done these things, and it's okay to be in that position. But there are times when people try to make you feel otherwise. And then lastly, I would say, do not join in the tearing down of any other woman in the field that you would like to be a part of. I think it's really hard enough that we are here in a lot of different fields. We are in the minority. And when you, what people sometimes don't realize, and I think sometimes unfortunately I have to say what women don't realize, that when they join in the tearing down of other women, they're actually setting up the foundation to tear themselves down. Because if you normalize women not being able to do certain things, not being able to be, beautiful, not able to dress a certain way and not be themselves in a certain way, just because you want to justify that you should instead have that opportunity, you're creating an opportunity where that same thing will come around and take you down. We need to be able to be firm in who we are and our abilities and say, I am better than the next person because, without saying that person's personality is what takes them away from something frivolous. We need to be able to say to ourselves, I mean, there's an Arjulard quote that says, my shackles and your shackles may be different, but we're no different from each other. And so sometimes we take to ourselves and say, well, I am better in this instance, and you are worse in this instance, so therefore I'm better than you. I'm going to join the train and hitting you down. But it's so much more important to say, I, as a woman, draw a line in cutting down any other woman because it's important that we all have the same opportunities, and men don't always have these same levels of attacks being leveled at them at the same way. So I'm going to change the temperature. Step into the room, change the temperature, and don't join in on that because I've seen it, and I've also seen how quickly it comes around. The same language that you use to talk about somebody, and the second you make a mistake, is the same language that's been used to talk about you. So let's be the change for each other because we literally are we have.
Absolutely. And I think in society sometimes they make it a negative to thank yourself. Because even recently I've seen a lot of female actresses in Hollywood actually taking the moment to say, I thank me for being able to achieve all of these things, and society makes you feel like, people tend to prop you up on the way up. And then when you get there, people are the first to then try to drag you back down to size. But this is where you wanted me to be. This is where I was working towards being. So why,
Exactly.
when I get there now, shouldn't I be proud of my achievements? So I think that's very powerful advice that you've just given there to the young women listening. I hope that they take heed and view arrogance in a different way, and also to be very delusional. And I've always said that about myself as well. In lots of ways, I've achieved the things that I have because I've been a little bit naive, or, or not being scared to ask, or sometimes going headfirst into something, not even really knowing what I'm doing, but being willing to learn. So I think that's very powerful and wonderful advice. But guys, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back in a few. So, guys, if you're just tuning into the WOW Show now, you are with me, your host, Vernaire Bass, and I am so happy to be sitting down this afternoon with the Honorable Quincia Gumbs-Marie. She has just been dropping gems left, right, and center, and I have to say that I am learning so much about what it means to be a powerful woman, and also what it means to navigate the world of politics. But Miss Gumbs-Marie, your dedication to climate action and sustainable development is evident in your work and also in your advocacy. Could you delve into what drives this passion within you? What personal experiences or convictions has shaped your commitment to addressing climate change and also promoting sustainable development in Anguilla or even across the world?
Well, before this administration, we've never really had important and serious conversations about climate change. It's been small voices in the corner, like advocating from small groups, but from a political level, we've never really had this level of advocacy that we have at the level that we have it now. And it's pretty simple. Nothing that we are doing right now will be sustainable if we don't attack climate change and the consequences of climate change. So I feel like my ministry, in some way, is, and when I say the most important, I'm not saying other ministries are not important, but the most important to our sustainability. We right now in Anguilla, we are embarking on airport development. We've just done more port development. We are um, doing more tourism and marina development. It's We're at a cusp of great economic opportunities. But if we aren't at the point of also advocating how do we come out of storms and major climatic events because of climate change, we will then lose those steps towards progress. And so it's important that the government, from a policy standpoint and from an investment standpoint, invest in understanding how we mitigate and adapt to climate change. But on a larger geopolitical standpoint, we also have to be able to advocate for ourselves and certain injustices that has been done to us. And for the overseas territories have been a very strong voice internationally on how we are systemically excluded from the conversations on climate finance. And we have not been given a climate finance fund in the wake of Brexit. And the UK seems to not want to have a serious conversation about that. But it is really going to come down to how can we access funds, how can we advocate for ourselves on an international basis, how can we insulate ourselves from the climate crisis that we are not contributing to. Right now, in May, you would know noticeably it's hotter, but from a scientific point of view, it's 5 to 7 degrees hotter in May than it has been historically. And what's even worse is that our water temperatures are that of August. So it means that if there's no signs of letting up, our oceans are holding great amount of energies. That when we do have tropical systems, we will see greater storms, more frequent storms, quicker intensification. And then what does that mean for us? Even if we as a country are spared, what does that mean for us as a region? Insurability, survivability, the way that we depend on other islands and Florida as well for food and different things like that, food sustainability, um, energy independence. All of these things are all linked together because these are our armors of defense um, against climate change. And so these things are very important to have at the forefront of our development. Our consciousness of climate change, our understanding of what sustainable development means, and also being able to protect ourselves. Because a big part of the work that I have been doing on sustainability is redefining what we define as owning our own definition, I should say, of sustainability. Because what you see is a lot of persons who come from um, the global West would say things like, well, we want to see more conservation, we want to see more biodiversity conservation, happening within your countries, which are very important. But when you have the conversation about sustainability, in countries where we have smaller economies, our people are a big part of the pillar of sustainability. So we can't stop fishing because of your idea of what sustainability and conservation is supposed to look like, because that means that we're going to cut off an entire economic engine from our countries. So having that level of advocacy on an international level and challenging what we define, how we define certain things for ourselves, is a big part of how we insulate our countries from being um, basically defined out of existence. And that's one of my biggest fears. So it's one of the things that I do, I think is important to our development. And I think it will put Anguilla and the overseas territories, because I don't only advocate for Anguilla, in a position where we have access to finance, we're not systemically defined out of issues, and also for the OECS and the CARICOM, that we can own our definitions and then use that as an advocacy tool against international companies coming in and telling us how we should define our own problems.
Fantastic. So you've also mentioned previously that your mantra is the obstacle is the way. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you faced numerous obstacles in your 4 years as a politician. How has this mindset evolved or remained constant throughout the years?
Well, that's the name of, title of a book that I read by Ryan Holiday. And it was a really good book about powerful people in history who would have had to go through it to get to it. And it really breaks down different reasons why the best way to get to the other side is to work through your issue. And I might have ignored some of the stories a little bit, but the title definitely stayed with me. And it's something that I took from that moment thereon. The obstacle is the way is my reminder that as a politician, my politics really should come second to the country's development. And it's that mantra that makes me put elections and electability second to national needs. And one of the greatest examples of that would be um, the work we would have done again around the goods and services tax, where politically it wasn't advantageous for us. However, for our country, we had to understand certain things. So when you look at the obstacle, there's certain things that you can do. You can say that I don't want to do this. If you see the mountain, you can go around the mountain if you wish, or you can decide to stop there and say, "Well, this is as far as I can go." And some of these options are the best options. Maybe it's best to not go any further. It may be best to avoid the obstacle. But you must first dissect the obstacle to understand whether is it just something in your way, or is it a symbol of a greater problem? And for us, it was easy to realize once we took the goods and services tax head on that the problem was our country's economic viability. The problem is that we would like to be politically independent at some point in our future, but we are not economically independent. And so, if you want political independence, the first thing you must look for is economic independence. The problem is that we have more reasons to, we have more information about all of the vulnerabilities that we have to face the country, but we had no resources to respond to that. And so while GST is the obstacle, the way is actually sustainability. And one of the things that you realize when you go through the obstacle is you eventually get to the other side of sacrifice. And I think that is the gift that awaits doing the difficult. And bringing your people along may be difficult, but you have, like I said, leaders lead and leaders listen. And you have to listen to the cries of your people, but you cannot be persuaded into believing that the information that you have doesn't have validity just because the decision that's in front of you is hard. And
Mhm.
so right now in Anguilla, we can see the dawn of a new day. We can see the other side of sacrifice. We can see what the value of doing the difficult thing was. Even though we're not through it all the way, we can see how it makes sense sometimes to go through the obstacle, sometimes to go through the difficult, to do through the difficult, to get to a better side of the country that we love and to see a new day in our country. So it's something that it to me is tried and true in my life. You go through difficult to get to the smoother. It's not going to
Mhm.
be instant. It's not going to be easy, but it's usually always worth it.
Fantastic. So, congratulations on your pregnancy. Um, you recently posted on your LinkedIn profile that you are more or less taking a break. So balancing your personal and professional life can be challenging, especially in a demanding role like yours. How have you managed to find harmony between your political career and your personal life?
Oh, that was a one, and I hadn't taken the break as yet. So the break is coming up at the end of the month. In fact, I feel like after I posted that, my premier decided to punish me a little bit by making me act in premiere while he was out. So now I'm like,
Okay.
well, what happens if I go into labor? He says, well, you're acting, you just have to appoint someone else. but right now I think it's relatively easy because there's no human in hand to manage. We have a package deal. We go together. I think the difficulty may pop up when I actually give birth, and I do that, and I'm navigating the actual time consuming part of motherhood. But I have a lot of support. I have a very involved husband and a very very excited parents and in-laws. So I know that it won't be a journey of solitude, and I anticipate to have a hybrid maternity leave sort of thing going on. In my mind, it makes perfect sense, but we'll see what the schedule looks like when I'm actually putting it into practice. But it's still interesting because across the region, in Angola, and even across the region, there's not many persons I can look to. In Angola, there have never been a female who's been expecting while in office. And across the region, we have quite a few examples of that not happening. And so it's a road where I have the machete in hand and I'm cutting the bush down on my own and creating creating for myself and for other people who would follow. But I think what has been exceptional is that I have a premier whose wife is a pediatrician and who is also a father himself, so he understands the time that I need to take off, and as well as my colleagues. I have a female governor who is also a parent, a mom, and a female speaker of the house. And so the people that I am directly, accountable to, they are very flexible with me, and I am just intending to communicate my way out of it and see how far that gets me.
Fantastic. So one question that I ask every guest is before we go, because we're short on time, but can you share with us a wow moment in your life or a defining moment when you knew that you were doing what you're born to do, if you know that you're doing that now?
I still question if this is like a stepping stone to somewhere else or this is where I'm meant to be. But I think I might have had a few, but I think the most recent and impactful would have been while I was in Dubai for COP. I was newly pregnant. I was very annoyed with life, and I was like, I have to go to do another thing. And I got onto a panel um, that was a EU OT panel with some other persons across an OECS panel, and advocating for finance for the overseas territories and really setting us apart in terms of why we need to be considered separately and we should be considered a separate case, particularly because of our geographical location. And there was a point where I can see the light bulbs in the room go off and people realizing like, well, we've never thought about this before. This was never an important thing to us before. It's only a few 14 OTs. It's not, we're not on everybody's, top of mind. And when I came down, a gentleman, very, very influential, came up to me and he said, I don't know how many people live in the overseas territories, but I hope that they recognize the importance of voices like yours and the fact that your one voice will possibly change the trajectory and how you all are considered on an international scale. And on behalf of them, even though I've never considered anybody from overseas territories, I really want to thank you because now I am leaving this room changed and permanently so. And I was like, okay, maybe this is not the worst place to be in life.
That's
and,
fantastic.
and so, like it's moments like that where you start to realize that even, I don't live for the applause and, my story may never be told because you don't record or document every moment. But if in 20 years I see the results of that one interview, that one panel session, then I can say that I have contributed, I have changed the trajectory for myself, for my country, for now, my kids and well child. and my nieces and nephews and people in the overseas territories. Because I've always said when I was in Dubai earlier that year as well, I don't stand as an Anguillan politician when I go internationally. I stand as a politician of overseas territories. And so I carry our plights and our problems as my own. I understand what's different between Montserrat and Angola, what's different between Cayman and Falklands. But I also understand what unites us, and that is the lack of access, lack of voice. And so that's really one of my biggest um,
Wow
words
moments.
that I feel like, makes a difference and solidifies that if not you, literally, who else?
Fantastic. And that is a wonderful way to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Quincia, for being my guest today on the Wow Show. Your wow moment was absolutely fantastic. And offline, I'll ask you who you can recommend to be our next guest because we're very short on time. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Wow Show. I hope that Mrs. Gumbs-Marie's story has wowed you. Next week, I have another amazing guest lined up for you, the holistic life coach, business strategics, public speaker, purpose troubleshooter, the one and only Vernaire Richardson. She'll be sharing her journey with us here on the Wow Show. As usual, set your alarms for Sundays at 4:30 p.m. We'll be right here with the phenomenal story of another woman of the West Indies. Have a fantastic week, guys, and I will be right back here next week.